Hello, and welcome back to Game Review. My name is Caleb Denby, and today we're going to be... Wait, what's that? I'm getting a breaking news update. Fabiano Caruana, who was previously thought to be pretty good at chess, is now, yep, it's confirmed, he is very, very good at chess. Today, we're going to be looking over a game of Fabi's from the Tata Steel Masters tournament, which he has just been crowned the champion of. This was his final round game against Vladislav Artemiev, and we're going to look and see how this one played out. So Fabi, apparently very good at chess, responded to knight of 3 with d5, and after g3, knight d7. A little bit of a surprise there. Knight d7, not the most popular move by any stretch of the imagination, but believe it or not, a few good players have actually played it, such as big names like Vallejo Pons, Aleksenko and Morozevich, and Grigory Operin, a Mizzou player who's actually on the rise. And so, while this move looks pretty strange, it's not that strange. And in fact, we'll see it just transposes to some pretty normal stuff pretty quickly here. White plays the move c4. Black takes that pawn because it's undefended. White responds with queen a4, desperately begging black to let white take this pawn back. Black plays a6, saying, sure, you can have your pawn back. So white captures, and black uses this opportunity to gain some queenside space. Now after queen c2, black can play bishop b7, and bishop g2. We see knight f6, castles, e6, and now d3. And so what we've ended up in is something pretty similar to the Catalan, but not quite. There are some very key differences here. The first key difference you might notice is this pawn on d3 has come to d3. In the Catalan, obviously that is a d4 opening, and the pawn is on d4. Another key difference, we saw this a6 b5 push against queen a4 to c4. This is the main line in a lot of Catalans. And so this queen does this little triangle dance, black expands on the queen side. But in this case, bishop b7 has already been achieved pretty comfortably for black. It's not always the case in the Catalan. And so you might think this is a less ambitious try than the standard Catalan. But actually bringing this pawn out to d3 gives white some more chances in different ways. Now, you'll see when black expands with c5, which is the common break in both the Catalan and this structure, there's nothing for this pawn to kind of bite at, nothing for it to grab onto. So files are going to stay a little bit more closed in this type of position, and it'll keep more major pieces on the board for a little bit longer and give both sides a little bit more chance to kind of play with the pieces. We see in this case, Fabi starts with bishop e7, and now white plays a4. You see, already trying to break down the slightly overextended b5 pawn. It's a very common idea that you see in many openings. When you see this a6 b5 structure, a4 is a good way to try and create some weaknesses. Fabi simply responds with c5, taking his queenside space. We see knight c3, queen b6 is a very nice supporting move. It's a great square for the queen. A takes b5, a takes b5, rook takes a8, bishop takes a8. See bishop g5 and castles. And now I'll play a couple more moves. Rook a1, Fabi plays h6, putting the question to this bishop. And now this bishop could try and retreat to a square like e3 or f4 or d2, but really it's going to end up in the way of white's own pieces. From these two squares, it is potentially weak to attacks from this knight. And from d2, it's kind of just in the way. It's blocking this queen's access to the e2 pawn, and it's not really serving a useful purpose. So, in this case, white decides to capture this bishop, and black also captures this bishop. And here I wanted to pause and kind of take stock of what's going on in this position. So Fabi has the hanging pawn structure on the queen's side. And that's just what it's called when you have these two pawns that are connected together, but they're isolated from the rest of the group because these two files are completely open for black. And what this means is that these pawns can sometimes be an advantage, and sometimes they can be a bit of a weakness. And that all depends on the amount of pressure that white can put up against them. At the moment, these pawns are actually giving black a very nice spatial advantage. And unless white can prove that they're going to be a little bit weak, maybe by playing a break like b4 in the future, maybe by just piling up on these pawns using the pieces. Unless white can prove that they're going to be weak, the spatial advantage is actually going to give Fabi a nice edge. And I think that's really the character of this game, and we'll see which player kind of handled this imbalance a bit better. Also notably, after bishop g5 and takes, Fabi now has the 2 bishops, which is a pretty nice advantage actually in this position. You'll see that the center is actually completely open for the moment. Whoops, some funny arrows there, giving black a nice advantage with the bishops. We'll see in the game, white actually deviated here from known territory. There was one game previously played by Sergei Matsenko and Webster player Ilya Nizhnik that went with queen b3. That game ended in a draw, but let's not waste too much more time. Knight d2, taking away the bishop pair for black, but still leaving black with an extra bishop. And now Fabi simply plays rook c8, understanding that he needs to support his pawns from behind, and eventually he's going to look to push these pawns to create even more space for himself. Artemiev now continued with queen b3, and this move was actually met with rook b8. Some mysterious maneuvers from Fabiano Caruana, but the fact is, with rook c8 and rook b8, he's actually kind of drawn this queen out to a square that isn't quite as good as c2. From b3, this queen's actually in the way of its own pawn a little bit, not the most comfortable. And if this queen were to retreat to c2, I would expect Fabiano to not repeat, because now he's brought this rook to b8 from f8, kind of for free. And now he could just continue moves like knight e5, moves even like g5 expanding on the king's side, just continuing his game plan. Of course, white does not have to try to repeat, and instead plays knight c to e4. Bishop's attacked, the bishop is strong, so we'll move the bishop. Bishop e7, this king actually steps back to g1, just stepping out of any potential checks or pins. And now Fabiano plays a very nice move here, and I'll let you at home try and pause the video for a second. It's not a tactic, but it is a very nice move to show what Fabi's plan is in this position. And so if you want to try and find Fabi's plan, the big commitment he makes on this move, go ahead and pause now. If not, here I come. It is f5. f5 is actually the best move in the position according to the computer, and according to me, and also according to Fabi, I bet. And the reason for that is that Fabi has this nice bishop, but really just this one target on b2 isn't getting the job done. And these pawns are nice, but he kind of needs these pawns here to prevent these knights from having any good squares. So what does Fabi do? He creates threats on the other side of the board as well. Bishop, being a long-range piece, attacks both sides of the board at the same time, and if he can create weaknesses on the king's side and weaknesses on the queen's side, then he'll be able to kind of overwhelm the white pieces. So the knight has one square to go to, so it goes there. Now Fabi brings this knight to e5, eyeing some potential threats. h3 is white's choice, keeping the black knight out of these potential threats. And now Fabi continues with the move h5, keeping an eye on this g4 square, and once again, threatening to create some weaknesses. Vladislav brought this knight to f3, allowing Fabi to take, because he felt that the pressure was getting a little bit too uncomfortable for him. So he accepts this kind of structural deficit in exchange for getting off this knight, which was powerfully placed on the e5 square. Here, Fabi does something pretty interesting, if you'll excuse the voice crack. Bishop f6 and rook e1. And now king f7 and knight e2. And the reason I say this was interesting is because maybe white missed a bit of an opportunity here to play this move h4. And after h4, it's a little tough to continue expanding on the king's side. You might imagine that, okay, Fabi continues with king f7. Now after this move f4, white is really trying to lock down on these dark squares to try and prevent black from really creating these weaknesses that he was so desperate to make to get winning chances. That being said, white did not go for this and instead played rook e1. And now after king f7, you can try something like h4 again, But yeah, I guess you can still go for this. And maybe white should have, but black is going to be creating some threats of his own a little bit more quickly, and white has wasted some time here. So it's not totally clear if white has time to play these moves like f4 and get kind of a lock on the position. So instead of h4, we actually see knight e2, and now g5. And I'm going to call this a little bit of a mistake from Fabi. Instead of g5, I would have liked to see this move h4. And the reason is, h4 forces this move g4, and we'll see that this is pretty similar to what happened in the game, but the difference is, now Fabi doesn't have to capture on g4. You play a move like g6, just let these pawns sit rather uncomfortably for a while. You can imagine queen c6 hits some uncomfortable squares, rook d8 hits some uncomfortable squares, and there's a lot of weaknesses kind of mounting in the white camp. In the game, something similar happened. Fabi played g5, and white responded with g4. But now, you don't have time to play this move h4, because g takes f5 takes advantage of a very annoying pin in the position. So now after g4, Fabi is forced to capture, and after takes, he captures again. And while the position is still pleasant, there's not this awkward-looking conglomeration of pawns on the king's side. And so it's a little bit less of an edge for Fabi, I think, here. That being said, the game continued with queen d6, knight g3, queen d5. Fabi would love to see takes and takes, because now these three pawns are much better as a majority than these two pawns on the king's side. So instead, we see queen c2, first bishop d4, then queen e2, then rook h8, trying to create some threats. White plays knight e4, eyeing some pawns, but now after queen e5, there are a lot of threats to handle here. In fact, queen f3 check, king g7, and perhaps this is kind of white's last chance to hold on. I think best was queen g3, going for a bit of a queen trade, when there are still some uncomfortable things in the position for white, some uncomfortable weaknesses to handle, but perhaps he's holding on here with the trade of queens. Instead, though, white plays b3, trying to hold on to everything, trying to keep the queen on the board, perhaps to make his own threats, taking advantage of this rook on e1, especially. But now, after Fabi's next move, rook f8, this queen comes to e2, and there's some uncomfortable pressure on f2. And now queen d5 comes as well, hitting this newly weakened b3 pawn. And after rook f1, defending this f2 pawn even more, we see king g6, a simple move. And after queen d1, c4 is Fabi's move to break through. And this move really undermines white's position here. It was really this knight on e4, holding everything together. It was the glue that kept white's position from falling apart. And by undermining its protector on d3, white's position is really going to crumble here. And we'll see it does in fact happen. B takes and B takes. And now after king g2, Fabi plays this move, bishop a7, attempting to capture on d3. F3 is played. Now c takes d3 is played. And after queen a1, we see bishop e3, trying to push this pawn even further. Rook f to d1 is actually white's final mistake. Here, he could have tried to hold on just a little bit more, astutely, more accurately with queen e1 hitting this bishop. And now after a move like d2, you're simply going to take this, and while you do win the exchange, g5 falls. And perhaps this would have actually been a pretty nice try for white. Fabi kind of let him back into the game, but instead we see rook d1, and now after queen c4, the game is kind of over. Queen c3 was white's attempt, queen a2 check, knight d2, and now we see queen c2 is the point, hitting all three. White simply can't hold it all together. Queen e5 is what white tries. Now after bishop takes d2, I hope you packed your running shoes, because now black is up a piece, white has no way to regain it, but you've got just one problem. Your king is going to have to escape this queen. So while the queen is pretty fast, this king actually runs faster. Everybody saw this entire line, king g7, queen e7, rook f7, queen e5, king f8, queen b8, king e7. We're running, we are running so fast. Can't take this rook, because I'll take your rook. Queen b6, I'm still running. Queen b5, here I go, running all the way to, not c3, but instead c4. Queen e6 check, king c3, queen e5 check, king somewhere, I don't even know, I'm just running. Queen d5, king b2, queen b5, and this is the last move, well, should have been the last move of the game. Queen b5. This king on b2 has actually finally found safety. We've run far enough because you can block this check with another check. And this is what spells the end of the game for white. Black takes this rook, and now this king has absolutely no problem finding shelter on c2. And this is where white decided to throw in the towel. So this was a very nice game from Fabiano, actually ending the tournament with a huge winning streak to go to 10 points in the tournament, which is kind of absurd. He had some tournament performance well over 2,900. And so yes, the breaking news is true. Fabiano is not just pretty good at chess, he is really, really good at chess. My name is Caleb Denby. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Game Review, and I will see you next time.